Jayom Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Stotara Satyashi Shrimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Sikoho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai. Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai. Mayapur Dham Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 1. The chapter is entitled, A Resident of Vrindavan. So last week we began this chapter, chapter 9, and Prabhupada had been staying in Delhi. Now he has decided to change his residence to Vrindavan. The train arrived at Mathura. Abai stepped down with his luggage and looked around, noting the recently constructed Mathura Junction building. Proceeding through the gate and out of the station, he found a Tanga driver, agreed on the fare, and started for Keshigat. So the Mathura Junction is one of the main railway junctions in India. There are 75 of them, because from Mathura, all of the trains coming from the north, from Mathura then they split to the east, to the south. And of the 100 most important, Mathura is classified as the dirtiest nowadays. We don't know what it was like then. That's how Mathura is rated. So this train that Srila Prabhupada took is still running today. It starts at Hazrat Nizamuddin. This Taj Express, it takes about 2 hours. I don't know how long it used to take then, because electricity hadn't been introduced at that time. It was still running on coal and steam. And that meant that the trains were very black. You'd sit in the train, and when you get off, your clothes would be all black. And even our little train that used to come, that's still coming from Mathura to Vrindavan, that was a small gauge train. And that was also a steam train. So these steam trains, they were phased out in around the 1980s only. So the steam trains were, by that time, 1980s, 1990s, it was quite exceptional to have a steam train. So people used to come to Vrindavan just to take that little ride. Now Prabhupada, he used to frequently come from Delhi to Vrindavan and back and forth because he was assisting his godbrother Keshav Maharaj in Mathura with the Gaudiya Patrika, which was a Bengali publication. And then he was also assisting his godbrother Bhakti Saranga Goswami in Karobagh. He had a mat there. And that was primarily Hindi, and Prabhupada would also write and lecture in English there. So we had heard that Bhakti Saranga Goswami, he was most of the time in Mayapur on the Bengal side. And he left the charge of the mat to Srila Prabhupada. But most of the disciples there were very new, illiterate, uneducated, and they tended to quarrel amongst each other and not do their assigned duties. So Srila Prabhupada, along with having to do the publication work, was expected by his godbrother to oversee the mat, which was quite difficult for him. Plus, he was interested in expanding the journal. He wanted to make it into a very popular preaching tool and make it as beautiful as Illustrated Weekly, which was a big magazine at that time in India. But Bhakti Saranga Goswami, he only wanted to print 500 copies of each publication. He didn't want to expand it. So he had a different view than Srila Prabhupada, and therefore, highly flattering Prabhupada, he dismissed him from the service, sent him off with 2 new sets of clothes, and recommended that he probably is very much needed by Keshav Maharaj in Mathura, so he should go there. So Srila Prabhupada could understand that he was no longer needed or wanted in the association of the Karobag Mat. So he began to be independent in Delhi, continuing with his printing work. He was penniless at that time, and although, with apologies, I haven't been able to give a Prabhupada Lilamrita class since October. Since that time, 2 very special books have come to my attention that fill in a lot of the information about Srila Prabhupada and his struggles and his successes during this time. One of them was written, it's not yet published. It was written by Srila Prabhupada's first disciple, Acharya Prabhakar. Now, the personalities that we're reading about here, many of them have passed on back to Godhead, and we had the opportunity to meet all of these personalities, because when Srila Prabhupada opened the temple, they would come to see him frequently, and we would see the interactions, the beautiful loving exchanges between Prabhupada and his former associates. So Acharya Prabhakar, he was the head of a Sanskrit, vice chancellor of Sanskrit University and chief medical officer of an Ayurvedic university, very highly placed, highly educated, one of the best Sanskrit scholars in the country, living in Jhansi, and he filled in many details about this time period. So this book, it was sent to the archives, and then Ekanath, who's in charge of the archives, he sent it to our godbrother Bhumipati Das, who lives here in Anand Niketan, and he does the Bengali translations and Hindi translations of Prabhupada's works, Prabhupada's letters. So this book was sent to him by Ekanath to see whether it's authentic or not. So when I read that book, and then I read from October, which was when Prabhupada had just, where I had left off, I read all of the 150 pages or so. They exactly corroborated. Everything was exactly the same, except Acharya Prabhakar gave many inside details that had not been known at the time that the Lilamrita was written. Now you can also notice in the back, if anyone wants to really understand how much Prabhupada did, at the back of this first volume, there are 2 appendices. One is the significant events in the life of Srila Prabhupada, which gives a detail of all the major things that Prabhupada did up to before he went to America. And the other is all of the articles that Srila Prabhupada wrote, both in English and Bengali. Also he wrote in Hindi. He also wrote things in Sanskrit. So this volume of the Prabhupada Lilamrita has as much knowledge as was available in the 1980s when it was printed. So we have that book, and then we have another book that was compiled in the 1990s. We have a god sister who is this time, she's passed on, gone back to Godhead. She left her body here some years back. A very great book distributor named Mula Prakriti. She took a few years out of her life, and she went, just as now we're experiencing the 50th anniversary of our temple opening is coming up, 2025. So within these 50 years, more and more devotees are joining Srila Prabhupada in his transcendental Leela. In other words, they're leaving our association, going back to Godhead. So she decided that before all of the associates of Prabhupada in his generation leave us, she wanted to interview them. And she wrote, our Srila Prabhupada, she collected, after years of traveling between Vrindavan, Jhansi, Bombay, Navadvip, and Calcutta, collected interviews of these associates of Prabhupada. So at this time, she broke it into different sections of Prabhupada's life, his early life, childhood, his Grihastha life. Now we're dealing with Srila Prabhupada's Vanaprastha life. He was still dressed in white. He had all of the same aspirations from the first meeting of his spiritual master when he told him to preach in English language. But now he was free from his family commitments in the Vanaprastha ashram. And after struggling in Delhi to print every fortnight, that means every 2 weeks, a 4-page newspaper, which he called Back to Godhead in English and Bhagavad Darshan in Hindi, he decided to now transfer to Vrindavan, so that in seclusion of Vrindavan, he could continue his writing. And then he would just go to Delhi only for printing. For half a mile, the wobbling horse-drawn cart followed the road between the tracks and the railway yard. This is exactly the same as when you get out of the junction now. There's a long half a mile, that's about 2 kilometers. At the main road, they turned left, passed under a railroad bridge, which is still there, and entered an open market. That's the Bhuteshwar area where the new bus stand is. Piles of fruits, vegetables, and grains were displayed on the ground, their vendors sitting beside them, bartering and measuring while customers milled about. The women of Mathura, dressed in brightly colored saris, yellows, greens, pinks, and purples, moved busily in the market. So at that time, that main road where all the buses come and go from, there were markets on either side. The vehicular traffic consisted mostly of bullock carts, the drivers often squatting on the wooden yokes between the shoulders of their animals, whipping alternately one ox and then the other with the length of rope joined to a wooden handle. Although this was the most populated area in the trip to Vrindavan, compared to Delhi, it seemed simple and rural. The sun was high. Now, just as here, when Srila Prabhupada established his temple, on both sides there were practically no buildings, and if you just went a few hundred meters past the police chowki, it was all forests and agricultural fields. So in Mathura also, now it's a very busy, polluted, so many vehicles, and now traffic lights even they've installed. But in those days, there was one hotel on that whole road and practically no buildings. And the way that we traveled was by Tanga, And if you were lucky, you could convince a rickshawala to ride you all the way here to Vrindavan. But mostly we would take tangas. And this was the same when Prabhupada was coming here. It wasn't much different when the devotees came here in the 1970s. Very little construction. It was just like a big village with the open markets and no vehicles practically. So it was very simple in those days. The sun was high, but the Tanga's top provided a partial shelter, and the summer's heat had passed. Beyond the bazaar, the road curved to the right, and Abai saw the nearby white domes of the massive sandstone mosque marking Krishna Janmastan. So in those days, we didn't have the large temples that the industrialists had built. It was just a very small temple at Krishna Janambhumi and the massive mosque. They were making arrangements to build the big temple at that time, but it was very small. Centuries ago, invading Muslims had destroyed the large Krishna temple and created the mosque in its stead. And now directly in front of the mosque stood a newer, smaller Krishna temple. So we could give a whole class about this invasion of the Muslims, how they came, looted the temples. Now in Mathura, there was a gigantic temple of Keshavji, where the Janmastan was. A beautiful deity. Now that deity, before the Muslims destroyed the temple, that deity was taken to another town and hidden. So that deity was still existing up until just a short while ago. Now it's not visible anymore, the Keshavji temple. And then the mosque was built. There's always a controversy about where the actual birthplace is of Sri Krishna, whether it's where that temple is, whether it's where the mosque is, whether it's just on the other side of Potra Kund. So there are different opinions, but since the temple now has been built there, we offer our respects there at that place. They approached the three-way junction, New Delhi, Central Mathura, Vrindavan. So I think that's now called Bharatpur Gate or Dig Gate, Dig. At Dig, there's three. Either you turn right to the Kotwali, or backwards, that's the Krishna Janmastan, or you go straight, and that's the path to Vrindavan. So that's all still there as it was at the time of Srila Prabhupada. The driver struck the horse with his whip, and the Tanga proceeded along the Vrindavan road, edging through a herd of white cows, the herdsman walking amongst them, carrying his stick. The road was busy with Tangas and slow creaking ox carts, loaded with market commodities and pulled by squat black water buffalo. A string of small spindle-legged donkeys carried oversized loads of firewood and sandbags. Now the buffalo, the donkeys, and the oxen, they were very prominent here. And particularly the donkeys, because there were no such thing as motorcycles in those days. So they would carry all of the laundry of the dhobies. And there was no restriction of river pollution in those days. So the Jamuna was just on the other side of the roads, and the donkeys would take all of the laundry, and they had the big flat stones, and all along the Jamuna bank, the dhobies would be busy cleaning the clothes. So all of this was very much a part of village life, Mathura life, Vrindavan life. Seeing the animals, no cars, no motorcycles, nothing like that. Of course, bicycles they had. Even in Delhi, Prabhupada would, to this day, when you go to Delhi, there was only one big factory, and that was the Goodyear factory. And Prabhupada would mention that factory because no cars, thousands upon thousands of people would come to this Goodyear factory on their bicycles every day. So when you would go into Delhi, you would see everyone on their bicycles. So there were bicycles, but for traveling, people had to use tanga primarily. Although much had changed in Abhai's life since he had come here to see his spiritual master during the parikrama years ago, Vrindavan had remained the same. He felt he had done the best thing in coming here, leaving the heat, the traffic, the fumes, the human passions of Delhi. It was a natural relief. Yet, even as he felt transcendental emotions for Vrindavan, impressions of his months of preaching in Delhi lingered in his mind. The city streets and himself going from place to place with his back to Godheads. Life in Delhi had been constant, vigorous preaching. Now he was more than 60 years old, but he was not coming to Vrindavan to retire. He had retired from household responsibilities, but not from his responsibilities of making back to Godhead as popular and sophisticated as illustrated weekly. Prabhupada always had a mission impossible in front of him. And wherever he was, if it was Lucknow, Kanpur, Delhi, Mathura, or Vrindavan, he kept these goals in sight always. And he would discuss them with anyone who would hear about them. Because by hearing, possibly that person would be able to help Prabhupada fulfill his mission to his spiritual master. Now, this is especially what Acharya Prabhakar shared in his book. Prabhupada would tell him dreams that he had. He told him once, I had a dream that Krishna came to me. In one hand was Bhagavad Gita, in the other hand was the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Krishna told me to take these books to the West. So everything that Prabhupada shared with his associates, it was all in reference to pleasing his spiritual master. And now he was coming to Vrindavan not for retirement. For instance, Prabhupada, when he opened this temple, he said that I've opened this temple for the elderly gentlemen of India to come and retire here. But Prabhupada never retired. He said, work now, samadhi later. He didn't retire, but he wanted all the retired people to come here and become Krishna conscious, and in their retirement to engage in Krishna's service here. He had one, he wasn't a godbrother, he was a disciple of Tirtha Maharaj, who lived just across the road from the Krishna Janmastan. His name was Dr. Verma. He used to be a doctor in the army. And when Dr. Verma heard that Prabhupada was building this temple, he came and met Prabhupada. And Prabhupada invited him, you come and live here, you can treat the devotees. So Dr. Verma came here with his wife to live, and he was always very supportive. One time he gave Prabhupada 20,000 rupees, and his wife started to cry. He said, my husband's giving you all of our money. We have 6 children. How will we live? So Prabhupada said, yes, your husband has given me this money, and I give you this money, and you take this money. And then his wife became so humbled. She said, Prabhupada explained to her, you take this money for your family, but if I have this money, your entire family will benefit. So then she gave the money back to Prabhupada. So even in retirement, Prabhupada was inviting people to come here to retire, but he would engage them in service. just as an afternote, his wife finally, Dr. Verma, he left this world. We had a wonderful program at his home when he left. And then when his wife left, because his wife was always trying to discourage him from helping ISKCON because of the large family. But when she left 2 lakhs to the temple. She just took all of her wealth and she left it to our temple here. So the change of heart was there by associating with Srila Prabhupada and seeing the wonderful work that he did. The sight of taller trees signaled the precincts of Vrindavan. As the thin horse trotted along past the police station, that police station is the Chungi on Mathura Road. That Chungi has always been there. They used to put down the stopper and see what you had in your tunga and take money from you. That's all there was. On both sides there was nothing but deep jungle. You dare not even enter. The jungle was so deep. You would see the wild animals inside. So the whole route from Mathura to Vrindavan was just jungle on both sides. And then you would come to the police Chungi. Now everything is so built up, you can't even realize that it's the same place. Past the police station and water trough for animals. On either side appeared the garden courtyards of private estates and ashrams. Fragile white malati flowers, golden marigolds, frangipani, that's champa trees, red hibiscus, trees of sorrow, and many other flowers and trees, some known only in Vrindavan, bloom forth in the brilliant sunlight. The Radha Govinda temple loomed fortress-like on his left. So in other words, Prabhupada came on Mathura Road and just kept going straight towards the Rangaji temple. And opposite in the distance, the high-rising tower of the Ranganath temple. They entered narrow streets, tighter and busier places with markets and city dwellings, and then it became quieter again. At the end of a narrow street by the Jamuna River, near the Keshi bathing ghat, stood the small and beautifully ornate entrance of the Bansi Gopalji temple, a narrow 3-storied building with 3 domes and many decorated arches. So how many of you have seen the Bansi Gopal temple? The Bansi Gopal temple, if you go to the Radharamanji temple and turn left, the road goes straight and then it turns right. And just at the corner of that turning place is the Radha Bansi Gopal temple. So nowadays, you can't enter into the room where Prabhupada stayed. It's up on the roof. But many years ago, we were able to go up there very easily and see how Prabhupada lived there in that room. It has other tenants now, so they don't allow the devotees to go there, at least since, has anyone seen the room? So we used to go up there to that room, and it just so happened that at one point, maybe in the 80s or 90s, must have been the 90s, our Bhishma department, we used to send out laminations of the deities to our donors. And all the laminations for our deities, the office of the lamination wala was right at that room. So the deities' pictures would be all along the roof drying. So even after Prabhupada left, the room was still being used at that time for Krishna's service, the temple service. Okay. Okay. After stepping over the curbside drain and walking up 3 marble steps, Abai entered the front door, the driver following him carrying the luggage. Once inside, Abai removed his shoes and entered the courtyard, which was open to the sky through a metal grate, on which a few birds sat 2 floors above. A column of sunlight lit one side of the courtyard, where a potted tulsi sat atop a pillar. The temple seemed cool and quiet. Adjacent to the courtyard was the deity room, its doors locked shut. Overhead was a mezzanine with rooms whose entrances were visible from the courtyard. A few saris and strips of cloth hung on improvised clotheslines. So if anyone wants to go there, I think that nowadays the darshan time is open till 11, and then from 3 in the afternoon till 7 in the evening. You can go there for darshan. Now, Acharya Prabhupada in his book, this is not so much explained here, but Prabhupada had been visiting this temple for years before that, and Acharya Prabhupada would go with him and sometimes stay with him. So it wasn't by chance that Prabhupada just happened to come to this temple. Whenever he would come to stay in Vrindavan, he had made arrangements with the pujari to stay in this room on the roof of the temple. And in those days, rent was 5 rupees per month. Also at the Radha Damodar temple, up until the time that Prabhupada was living, the rent was 5 rupees per day. And then after Srila Prabhupada left, the pujari took advantage. He raised it to 60 rupees a month. And then he raised it to 300 rupees a month. And now only our accountant in charge knows how much we're paying. But I'm sure it's become many multi-times more than that. But Srila Prabhupada's rent was 5 rupees a day. Mahant Gopal, the temple pujari, whom Abai had known since 1954, greeted him cheerfully. He was about the same age as Abai and had long gray hair and an unruly beard. Although Abai's attire was modest, he appeared well-dressed compared with Gopal, who wore only a coarse dhoti. Gopal led Abai upstairs. Coming out onto the roof, Abai smiled to see again the wonderful vista. Barely 100 yards away, he could see the Jamuna, not only the immediate patch of water flowing before him, but to his left and right, a broad curving sheet of river shimmering in the afternoon sun, because just at that area where the Bansi Gopal temple is a very ancient temple that people don't usually go see anymore, and that's the Jugal Kishore temple, which is one of the original temples that was constructed at the time just after the Goswamis. This Jugal Kishore temple, it's the big dome that you see. The dome starts, it's kind of like the Madan Mahan temple. The dome starts at the ground and just goes straight up. So that you can see, and then you can see the whole expanse from the roof of the Jamuna temple. So if you have time, if you're allowed to, you can go and take darshan there of the Bansi Gopal temple. Maybe they'll allow you to go on the roof to see this beautiful darshan of the Jamuna River as well. There were sand deltas, herds of cows, and buffalo grazing. The flat grassy banks of the Jamuna, and plains and trees as far as the eye could see. So yes, this is exactly how Vrindavan was. We could drink the water of the Jamuna at that time, and the cows and the buffalo, they would daily come to drink the water. Even our cows from the Goshala, because the parikrama path was all beautiful white shimmering sand at that time. So every day after they would have their morning milking and then feeding, they would all go out the gate and go down to the Jamuna for some exercise, drink the water there, and then come back for their afternoon milking and feeding. So this is what all of the cows used to do in Vrindavan. They would have their meeting places. After eating and being milked, they would be let out of their homes. They would meet in different groups. They would go to the Jamuna, drink the water, and then in the evening time, come back to their homes as well to be fed and milked. This was Vrindavan life, and beautiful life. The cowherd boys with their buffaloes and their cows and the beautiful monsoon clouds and the rains coming down and the cows running everywhere. There were cows everywhere in Vrindavan. And even in Delhi, when we came to Delhi, the cows were all over Connaught Place. There was no restriction of cows anywhere in Delhi. We would have to stop our cars because there were so many cows all accumulating at Connaught Place. So this was really the beauty of India. The cow was respected. The cows, they were still the basis, the foundation of the culture until industrialization took over. And in the opposite direction was the town of Vrindavan, marked by dozens of temple spires and domes. Abai's room, the only one on the roof, was small, with narrow double doors and barred windows. So if you want to see this room, they might not let you upstairs now, but you can go onto the internet and you can just type Bansi Gopal Temple, and you'll be able to see the outside of this room. They have pictures of it. Sitting on the apartment's roof, monkeys with their tiny offspring sat watching, unalarmed. Just outside the door, a 2-foot-high cement pyramid signified that the temple deity was directly beneath. Abai entered the room. Through the barred windows, he could see the palace at Keshigat, the venerable tower of the Gopinath temple, and beyond, the uninterrupted flat river, the green banks, and the sky. So, Acharya Prabhakar, when Srila Prabhupada was living with him at the Bharati Bhavan in Jhansi, we've heard the story before about when Governor K.M. Munshi came there for a program, and Prabhupada arranged a big Pandal program at the Bharati Bhavan. The governor came. Now, when the governor went to the program at the college, because Acharya Prabhakar was a very erudite Sanskrit scholar, the principal told him, you have to speak in Sanskrit to the governor. So Acharya Prabhakar began giving his address in Sanskrit, and the governor was so impressed. He said, I am kidnapping this Prabhakar Mishra, which was his name. Prabhupada said, just like Jagannath Mishra, same family. He said, I am kidnapping him. I'm giving him a 5,000 rupee bonus for speaking in Sanskrit. And I'm taking him from Jhansi and transporting him to run the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan in Bombay. And Acharya Prabhakar had no choice because the governor was doing that. And this was how everything fell apart in Jhansi. Because from that meeting at the college, then in the afternoon, the governor was brought to the Bharati Bhavan where Prabhupada had the whole program, And again, Acharya Prabhupada spoke in Sanskrit. And Mrs. Munshi was there. And there were two ladies, Suryamukhi and Chandramukhi. Now, Suryamukhi had helped to convince Mr. Bayal to give Prabhupada the Bharati Bhavan. But now with Mrs. Munshi, the three ladies conspired and gossiped. This is how Acharya Prabhupada explained it. And they made a plan to take it away from Srila Prabhupada. Now, Acharya Prabhupada couldn't help because he went to Lucknow to receive that 5,000 rupees, and the governor told him, tonight I'm putting you on a plane and sending you to Bombay. And Acharya Prabhupada, he said, how can I leave? I'm the principal, I'm the CMO, all of my belongings are there in Jhansi, at least give me. He said, no, I will see that all of your things are brought to Bombay. He took over his life entirely. He couldn't even say goodbye to Srila Prabhupada. He flew him to Bombay. He said, you stay here 15 days, and then you go to Kurukshetra, where every year there's a Sanskrit conference of all the Sanskrit scholars of India come there. We went there. We sold Prabhupada's books to all the Sanskrit scholars. Prabhupada was so happy. But Acharya Prabhupada had to take full control of that conference. So the governor took him, actually kidnapped him, took him to Bombay, and then finally, when everything was completely destroyed in Jhansi, Prabhupada joined him in Bombay for 2 years. And then Prabhupada was invited to come to Delhi to help his godbrother, and now he's here in Vrindavan. Acharya Prabhupada came to visit him, and when he saw how small the room was that Prabhupada was living in at the Bansi Gopal temple, he said, you come and live with me again in Bombay. I'll give you all facilities so you can do your preaching there. I'll introduce you to Mr. Chokshi, who is the secretary of Sumati Murarji. You can have all your dreams fulfilled. So even at this little place, devotees were trying to help Prabhupada fulfill his dream. He was not simply reclusive writing. He was always aiming for going to the West, and was even willing to give up living in Vrindavan so that he could go to the West and preach. After acquainting Abai with the details of the room, the small kerosene burner, the rope and bucket for drawing bathwater from the well to the roof, Gopal meticulously produced a government-stamped rental agreement. Abai wrote a short paragraph declaring himself a disciple of the late Sri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada and attesting to his renting the room at 5 rupees per month. Both parties signed. Is there a clock? 6:45. Huh? 6:45? Okay, thank you. After his bath, Abai took prasadam and rested. When he heard the bells ringing in the temple below, he went down to see the deities. Gopal, who had been the temple's pujari for many years and had seen its reconstruction in 1923, had told Abai that the temple deity Bansi Gopalji had been installed 350 years before by Mahant Prahlad Das of the Nimbarka Vaishnav Sampradaya. Gopal himself had installed the deity of Radharani. Bansi Gopalji, standing in a graceful threefold bending form and holding his flute, was very appealing. He was 3 feet tall and of black marble. Radharani, slightly shorter, was of brass. So, if we have heard about the history of the major temples here in Vrindavan, the deities were Krishna, Madan Mohan, Madan Gopal, Govindaji, Gopinath, even Banki Bihari, Radha Raman,